and welcome to A Dose of Wellbeing, the Pharmacist Support Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Cochrane, and it's great to have you with us as we discuss all things well-being in pharmacy. I'm joined today by Danielle Hunt, our Chief Executive here at Pharmacist Support, as we discuss the different types of talking therapies and supports that are available to individuals as they navigate challenges in their work and professional lives. It can be a bit confusing understanding the difference between mentoring and coaching, CBT and counselling. In this episode, we will demystify these terms and unpick what kinds of supports can help people with different challenges in their lives. So, Danielle, let's start with the basics. Why did we feel this was an important topic to cover on the podcast?
Well, I think, like you said, it can be quite hard to navigate. So I think we just want to help people navigate. So at different points in our lives, we all need some sort of support. But what that support looks like depends on the challenge we're facing. So sometimes it might be an emotional challenge. We might have high stress, anxiety. We might be dealing with grief. Other times it might be a little bit more practical. You know, we're thinking about a change in career, learning a new skill, developing in some way. And then other times it might just be we need some connection or some guidance, or for someone who's been in a similar situation to talk through how they've dealt with something and walk us through. So that can all be quite different. And sometimes it's hard to understand which might be the best, because often you're bombarded with, we've got all this support, you know, there's this support and that support. And unless you really understand what the benefits of those different support can give you, it's quite hard to then decide which one. Yeah. So what we thought was it would be really good to just go through, well, what are the different challenges and what support might be appropriate, and what does that support offer you, and what does it do, but also importantly, what doesn't it do? And I know we're really lucky because we've got you, Melissa, who is highly experienced in this area. And I suppose it would probably be good to start with mental health support, because personally, I do find this quite confusing at times. You know, you are bombarded with all the types of support, which is great. But if you're in kind of high stress, it's probably the worst time to be trying to navigate it. So I think if we can talk a little bit about that first, I think that would be really good. So if I had a mental health issue, what support is most appropriate? What would you say to me?
Okay, so I think if we're talking about a mental health issue, so anxiety, depression, those are probably the most common ones. Yeah. I would be probably advising someone to be looking for a counselor or a psychotherapist. Mm-hmm. So people may seek support from a counselor or a psychotherapist due to anxiety, depression, can even be bereavement. Now, some people would say they don't think it's appropriate to get support for a bereavement until a certain amount of time has passed. I've heard that from a lot of people. Right. I can understand why people might say that. However, I also think if you're really struggling with a bereavement and you get support from the beginning, it can help you to be patient with yourself, to be kind to yourself, to understand the stages of grief, you know, all of that. So I don't necessarily agree with that idea that you shouldn't see someone for a particular amount of time after a bereavement. I understand the idea, but I don't necessarily agree. So those are some reasons. Those are more generalized reasons that probably most counselors or therapists could deal with. Then you've got things like trauma, so like PTSD. Yep. There's complex PTSD, which is more around trauma that was experienced when you were much younger and that is still impacting you. Mm-hmm. PTSD has to do with maybe a singular event when you're an adult, like a car crash or something. Yeah. But the trauma that you experienced as a child, say if you were abused or experienced parental bereavement, something like that, that would probably be classed as more complex PTSD. Mm-hmm. Then there are things like obsessive compulsive disorder, so much more specific things. So addiction. So when you're encountering something like that, I do think it's important to see a counselor or a psychotherapist who really specializes in those areas, because those are they respond well to certain types of therapies and treatments. And it's really, I think, important to get someone who really understands those things. So that, all of that aside, one of the main factors in the success of any therapy is the fit between the client and the therapist. So say you have, the top rated therapist for obsessive compulsive disorder, but you don't really like them and you don't really like the way that they're working with you. That can really impact the success of the treatment. So I think it's really important to understand that any kind of therapy is relational. And a huge part of what impacts the success of that therapy is that relationship between you and the therapist. So getting that right has been found in numerous studies to be one of the most impactful things.
Yeah. And I suppose one of the things that I'm always challenged by is the different approaches as well, and understanding them, because people talk a lot about CBT and I've never really fully understood all the differences. So what are the most kind of popular therapeutic approaches that people might kind of encounter if they do seek help?
So a lot of people have heard of CBT. So that's cognitive behavioral therapy. That one takes the idea that how we think about things can impact how we behave, which impacts how we feel. So it's kind of unpicking our thinking and our behavior and how things impact us in those ways. And there's a lot of evidence for how that's helpful in lots of different ways. For things like anxiety and depression, I don't think that, a lot of people would say that CBT is kind of the gold standard because there's been a lot of research behind it. I think that the approach is very powerful. I don't think it's the be all and end all. I think that some people respond really well to a person-centered approach. Another approach that is gaining traction is acceptance and commitment therapy. And this one's interesting because it brings in elements of cognitive behavioral therapy, but it also brings in kind of mindfulness and some visualization and different approaches. There's psychodynamic psychotherapy, which looks a lot at your family of origin and stuff like that. You've got internal family systems therapy, which looks at all of the different types of identities that you've built up over the years. So there are a lot of different approaches, and I think it's fine to look for an approach that feels meaningful to you, because it really is very personal. So is there one that really appeals to you? But then again, it's finding that right person. So if you've got a great psychodynamic psychotherapist and you really like the idea of psychodynamic therapy, but you don't have that great fit, it's probably not the one. So it's kind of that combination of finding the right approach with the right person, and also in combination with, is it the right approach for what you're dealing with? So it's kind of taking all those things into account. And there are so many different therapies. I wouldn't have time to go into them all. But I also do want to mention that there are approaches that work with the body and the body's response to stress and trauma. These are called somatic therapies. And those can be really powerful for trauma. So a lot of them have been written about by experts in the field of trauma, like Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk. And these ones, so a lot of trauma is, there's a physical response that happens within your body to stressful situations. And this is helping to work with that physical response and bring it down so that you have that space to actually heal. And it's very hard to move forward when you're stuck in a fight-flight cycle that you can't break out of. So it's helping to break out of that cycle. So somatic therapies can be really effective as well.
So it sounds like there's quite a lot of approaches.
Yes.
And I know you were a counsellor for some time.
Yeah.
Would you recommend any particular approaches, or when people are thinking about that and think, well, what will be most successful for me? What would you ask them to consider?
I think there's a lot of good information out there. You can look at the websites of the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. There's the UKCP, which I think is the UK Counsellor for Psychotherapy. And I think if you do some research, find an approach that feels good to you, that you buy into, basically, and then find a practitioner who you resonate with. That's going to be the best way.
And often when people are receiving whatever form of support, sometimes they have other things alongside. I'm thinking medication or other interventions, sort of looking at diet, looking at exercise. I mean, what's your experience of that as a counsellor?
Yeah, so I have worked with people who are taking medication and not taking medication. It can be a good combination if that's what somebody wants to do and their doctor is recommending it. Some people don't like medication. They try it. They don't like how it makes them feel. They don't want to be taking something for the rest of their lives. And that's fine. You know, they can work with their doctor and their therapist if they decide that isn't the right approach. So I think, again, it's really hard to answer because it's incredibly personal. So I've seen a lot of successes both ways. Where it gets really interesting is the lifestyle interventions, because I think it would be very hard to argue that diet and exercise don't impact mental health. I think we have so much research and evidence that mental health is intricately linked with our physical selves as well. So we know that exercise is helpful. We know that how you're eating is impactful. We know that ultra-processed foods are not good for us in terms of our physical bodies, but they're also impacting mental health. There's a lot of research coming out showing that the health of our gut microbiome is also impacted with, or can be an impact on our tendencies towards depression, anxiety. So looking after our physical health is really important. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who would say it's not helpful to have a good diet and get some exercise. There are some people who might take that too far. So we don't want to become sort of obsessed with exercise. We don't want to become obsessed with having the right diet. That can lead to other mental health problems. So it's all in moderation. The other thing that I think is really important to look at when we're thinking about the interplay between physical and mental health is our dietary allergies and intolerances. Now, sometimes allergies and intolerances can cause mental health type symptoms. Right. And a lot of people might not know that. So I'll use myself as an example. I was getting a lot of feelings of anxiety for a certain time in my life. And I was self-aware enough to realize that it wasn't starting in my mind. It was being generated in my body. So it was like my body was going into fight or flight. And then my mind was scrambling to explain why this was happening. Like, oh, am I nervous about this presentation coming up? Or am I worried about someone in my family? Or, you know, I'd be looking to think like, why am I suddenly flooded with anxiety? And it was when I got in front of a really skilled physician who was able to notice that this was probably an intolerance. Once that was diagnosed and found out, that melted away on its own. So it's something that not a lot of people are aware of. I would love to raise awareness of that. Thyroid issues can also cause a lot of mental health type symptoms. So I think sometimes what we think of as physical health problems can have mental health manifestations. And so it's really looking holistically, and it can be really helpful to work with a doctor or a nutritional therapist or someone who has an understanding of that and can help you unpick that as well.
Wow, that's fascinating, because I haven't really thought about it like that. And I think, You explained it well, because I think if you're worried about something, that is coming from your mind, isn't it? You're actively worried. But you said it came the other way. So what kind of symptoms or feelings did you have for you to be able to recognise, actually, that's not from my brain? Was it more that you weren't actively worrying, but you had the symptoms and then you're like, something's going on?
Yeah, it took me a long time to figure this out.
Yeah.
But after a while, I started realizing, like, my mind isn't ruminating on things I'm worried about, and then this feeling follows. What I realized was happening was I would get like this surge of anxiety, and then my brain was scrambling to explain it.
Yeah.
And I thought it took a while, but I thought, this isn't coming from my mind. This isn't coming from my thoughts. So if you are struggling with anxiety, for example, it can be worth trying to, this is somewhere that mindfulness can really come in so handy, if you can sit with it and really try to unpick what's happening in your body, what's happening in your mind. But you have to become still enough to notice where that's coming from. If you're just constantly rushing from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, you're not likely to have the space to look at that.
And I suppose that's important when you're thinking about the type of support you need, because if it's not coming from the mind, rather than just rush into something, maybe taking a step back and trying to understand it a little bit, and maybe you can get help with that as well.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, we did a podcast recently about women's health and the impact of hormones, and again, that can, you know, make you feel really anxious, make you feel really stressed, and focusing some of those issues, I suppose, are quite important, the physical issues as well. So I think that's really fascinating. And I suppose from a counselling perspective, just moving back to that a little bit, obviously what I've found, and I think as we've been talking more and more and as the podcast is growing, is that there does seem to be a slight reduction in stigma around counselling. It does feel that people are more open to it. I mean, is that shown in the facts and figures? I know we have a counselling service. Kind of what's your feeling about how people are accessing counselling?
I definitely think that there's more of an acceptance now than there used to be. I think people used to worry, like, oh, if I see someone, it means that I'm quote unquote mental, or, you know, I'm not strong enough, or, you know, we should be able to keep calm and carry on. You know, all those things that we used to say to ourselves. And some people probably still do say those things to themselves. But I definitely think that as a society, it's much more accepted. We have celebrities, leaders, all kinds of people coming out and sharing their stories more. And I think that that's really powerful in breaking down stigma. It's much more accessible. Most EAPs, or employee access programs, will cover some form of counseling. So I definitely think that access has improved and stigma has reduced.
Okay, so I know at the charity we have our own counselling service, and I know that we've seen an increase in demand, but we probably know that not everyone's accessing it who need it. So what might be some factors that put maybe pharmacist, student or trainees off in terms of accessing support? Yeah,
I think there is stigma. Even though I just said it's reduced, it hasn't disappeared completely.
Of course.
Especially pharmacists, I think, and medical professionals who are registered professionals feel very strongly that they should be the ones who have the answers and that other people can come to, and it can be very hard to say, actually, I need help. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think there can be fear around being a registered professional. Like, does this mean that I'm not fit to practice if I need to get some help? Could there be repercussions in my career? So you might see people afraid to use employee access programs, afraid to use anything that is employer linked. So we do see a lot of people coming to us because we're independent of that employer. And I think that if anyone is afraid to come to us, maybe they're worried that we would tell their employer something, which we don't do, by the way. But I think there can be that fear. Other things that can put people off seeking help are long waiting times. In our service, we don't really see these long waiting times. Most people are seen within a couple of weeks. But there can be very long waiting times in other services. And there can be worries that the counselor might not understand their concerns or their issues, especially if it's workplace related. In our counseling service, we're very lucky because we've built a very solid relationship with our counseling provider, the Counseling and Family Center. And the counselors who see the pharmacists who are referred through us have a lot of experience with pharmacy now. So we've been able to address some of that within the charity, which I think is really great. And then, of course, there's cost. I mean, cost puts a lot of people off. It's not necessarily a cheap undertaking.
Yeah. And you mentioned the kind of workplace issues and maybe a fear that the counsellor won't understand. And we have our peer support service as well, don't we? So when would it be more appropriate or appropriate to use for peer support? And can you just tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so our peer support program we call our listening friends. And our listening friends are all pharmacists who've had additional training in listening, supporting, and providing a sounding board for someone. So if your issue is maybe not to the point that you think you need to speak to a professional, so professional counselor, psychotherapist, maybe you're experiencing something in the workplace that you're uncomfortable with. Maybe you're a trainee and you're finding the trainee really hard. You don't necessarily think you need counseling, but you do need somewhere to offload and get some perspective. That's where our listening friends can step in. They're an absolutely fabulous service, and they understand the in and outs of the profession.
Yeah, and I suppose that's really interesting because it could be work or personal, and it's just talking through the issue. I suppose if someone had kind of maybe a broader work issue, more around like being stuck in their career or thinking about what's next, what might be appropriate support there? Because that's a little bit different. It's not necessarily just an issue, it's thinking about the future and how you get there.
Yeah, I think that's great. So that is where coaching might be able to help. So I've got a couple of scenarios we can think about. So say we've got a pharmacist who feels stuck with a workplace problem, such as competing pressures or uncertainty about how to handle this difficult situation. They might work with a coach to gain clarity and improve their confidence. This can help them to find a way forward. So it's kind of goal-driven.
Okay. Yeah.
So in that case, a coach can be really helpful. Another scenario might be that a pharmacist is wanting to work towards a specific professional goal. They want to move into a new role. They want to develop leadership skills. They might realize there's something blocking them. Like maybe they've got really severe imposter syndrome that's stopping them from pursuing a goal that they really want to. They might want to use coaching to help them to address some of those blocks and move forward in their career.
Yeah. And do you have any tips on how to choose a coach? Is this similar to kind of your examples you gave on how to find a counsellor? Is that about just finding the right fit? How might you go about finding one?
Yeah, it's so, and I think both counseling and coaching are unregulated professions. So it is important to find someone with a good background and who's had good training. You might look for someone who's a member of an organization like the Association for Coaching. And of course, relationship is a big fit. Now with coaching, because it is about specific, often job-related goals that you want to achieve, it's worth finding someone who specializes in that area. So there are coaches who specialize in senior leaders. There are coaches who specialize in educational leaders. So it's finding someone who specializes in your area. Another thing to be aware of is that the CPPE, the Center for Postgraduate Pharmacy Education, they offer coaching for pharmacists working in England. So it's worth looking at them if there's a particular goal that you have that you would like some support on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose what struck me then was mentoring as well, which isn't quite as formal as coaching. But I think that's a really good way to share experiences and perspectives. So I've been mentored and I've provided mentoring to people.
Yeah.
And I think it can be quite good because it allows you to kind of think about the challenging questions. Often that's built on a relationship already. So it's someone you know or someone that you respect and you want to build that relationship. So I think mentoring can be quite good. But it is important that the mentor has experience, I think, because it can be a poor experience if it moves along. Because people just think, well, what's a mentor compared to a line manager? And I think good mentors structure conversations and they set clear boundaries. They're not trying to kind of solve the problems for the person, but kind of use their experiences and guide somebody. So I think that can be quite useful. And I think in a work context, that can maybe help with career progression. You talked about leadership development. That can be helpful through mentorship. Helping people navigate change and organisational culture, sometimes particularly if someone's in the same organisation and has maybe been there a long time and someone's new and they just want to mentor that person into how to navigate that. I think it's great for helping build confidence and support someone in a transition. That's when I've been supported previously. You know, someone... directors or someone who's took you under the wing a little bit and provided that mentorship, I think can be really powerful. So I know that's slightly different from coaching, but mentoring is also quite useful as well.
Sounds really useful, especially because with mentoring, correct me if I'm wrong, but you would be mentored by someone who's already done but what you would like to do.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're pulling on their experience, and I think that's really powerful. Because, you know, someone who's gone before you and done it can provide an awful lot of insight.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
That's great. Okay, well, I think that's a great place to round off the conversation, but it's been a great conversation about support and the kinds of changes it can help with. Accessing the right support at the right time can be truly life-changing. So if this podcast has inspired you to find your own support, please do check out our Counseling and Listening Friends peer support programs. We also have our addiction support program for anyone experiencing addiction or dependency issues. You may also wish to look into the RPS mentoring program, and do remember the CPPE for coaching for pharmacists. You can also see our additional mental health and well-being support page for information about where you can find mental health and well-being support. The support options outside of pharmacist support may also be available to members of the pharmacy team who are not eligible for our services. So that's worth keeping in mind. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you feel you may need support, because we can help to guide you to make sure that you get the right support for your needs. We want to continue providing our free and confidential support services and to open up conversations like this to ensure that no one in our pharmacy family faces challenging times alone. As an independent charity, we rely on donations from individuals and organizations across the profession to enable us to do this. So if you're in a position to do so, please consider making a donation today. You can find information about how to donate in the show's description or at the end of the video. Donations help us to provide our essential services, including our counseling and peer support, financial assistance, and more. Thank you again for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again on our next podcast.